Hi, and welcome, Louise.
Hello, great to be here. Thanks, Nana.
Likewise. So, who is Louise? What are your background? What are you up to? Where are you right now?
Well, physically wise, I'm in Surrey in the UK, but yeah, and this is where I'm based for what I do in property. Who am I? Well, I'm someone in property. I've got my own property business, property venture, and it's through that I help distance investors. So it could be people like you, Nana, or anyone else who's based abroad and wants to invest in UK property. But I tend to specialize in expats. So people who are here, who have been here and then they've moved abroad. So they could be based in the UAE or Indonesia or even in, Continental Europe, like, you guys. Yeah. So that it's people who have an affinity for the property market here in the UK, who understand it. We might come on to this a bit later on. It's a different buying process here in England, Wales and Scotland versus Continental Europe. So I basically help expats invest. So I either offer a bespoke buying agency service, which is a bit different to what people dub sourcing. It's a bit different, it's a bit more tailor-made, it's a bit more bespoke. So for that tailor-made service where I'm retained by a client, by an investor, to find a property against a specific brief for them. And I tend to offer that service in the home counties because this is my patch and this is what I know. But I can also help expat investors nationally if they're looking at building new build, or say they want to roll up their sleeves and do it themselves, but they're a bit not confident because they want to check things out like on their due diligence or how to go about it. Then I offer a consultancy service for that. So I offer a national service, either new build or consultancy, and also more bespoke. But that's not the only thing that I do. I also invest. So I've got investment property abroad in Continental Europe, as well as here in the UK, in Surrey. So I'm sure you're going to want to know a little bit about that. But who am I? Before I got into property, I've got like over 2 decades worth of business experience. So for me, it's almost like, I don't know how you define careers, but it's like either my second or my third career, however you look at it. So when I started out as a graduate trainee, I started out in the drinks business as a sales and marketing graduate trainee. And have also spent some time in financial services. So I understand industry. I've been in the service sector and consumer goods. And then I went into management consultancy because I worked on a management consultancy project when I was at Nationwide Building Society. And there I quite liked the buzz of the teamwork, focusing on a particular aspect of marketing or sales or, the business. And so I went into that and again spent over a decade doing that before I came into property. And property really has enabled me to carry on doing things that I love. I love being in business. I love, I don't know whether I'd call myself an entrepreneur. I suppose there must be elements of what I do that make me entrepreneurial, but it means that I've been able to carry on doing some of the stuff I love in business, but at the same time spend a bit more time with my family. So property has enabled me to do that, either investing personally and or helping others through property ventures. So does that give you a bit of a flavor?
Yeah, it does. So you mentioned that you invest in different countries. May I ask which countries that you invest in?
No, I don't invest in other countries. I've invested in Poland, so in Krakow in Poland. In fact, I call myself a FTOB, a first-time overseas buyer. But I should probably be a FTIB, first-time investor buyer. FTOIB, first-time overseas investor buyer. Yeah, because I'm quite risk averse. So getting comfortable with an investment features heavily in anything that I do. And I suspect for any of, you distance investors in a different country, you have to do that much more to get comfortable because you are that much further away. So because I'm a cautious investor, I do a lot of upfront checking things out before I get comfortable. And I suppose for me at the time, this is going to seem like a weird comparison. At the time, I looked to invest and set up my business. It was back in 2007. So this was about the time that it was announced that London were going to get the Olympic Games in 2012. And it was announced that, it's going to be at Stratford. So already property prices in Stratford, East London, had started to go up. And I thought, you know what, this would be a good place. There's going to be a lot of inward investment, all the classic things that you identify in property investing. And so I went and had a little look around and thought, you know what, this is all great, but in order to get on the property ladder here, it's going to take quite a bit of money. I think 2-bed terraced house, 250,000, back in 2007, I was thinking that's quite a lot of money. And actually, to what extent has the uplift already been baked into the price? Because the announcement already happened, there'd already been an uplift in the price. And I sort of kind of thought, well, I'm not sure how much I'm going to benefit from that, because I'm already going to be coming in where some of that inflationary uplift has come into the pricing there. And at the same time, I was looking at overseas deals as part of setting up property venture, and a deal crossed my desk in Krakow in Poland, and it had all the hallmarks of things that I've come to like in property investing. So it was a small tenement building, so it had some character to it. It was an older building. It was there were only, I think, 6 units, 6 individual living quarters in this block, and it's what we would now call airspace rights. So it was being extended upwards, so it was getting another floor stuck on top. So for me, it was a smallish residence. It wasn't somewhere, you've got a big high-rise block of flats where all of the investment properties are going to come to flood the market at once, as rentals, which makes it quite difficult to occupy and not suffer voids.
Yeah.
Had character, but also with the upside of having new build, because it was going to be a newly finished flat on top. So I quite like that, looked at the numbers, thought that looked great. And it's going to sound wacky, but it was, I made phase payments. We had the exchange rate fluctuation, the rest of it. But basically, I think it was like £56,000 for this 1-bed flat. It's a 37.5 square metre 1-bed flat. And for some reason, my logic went, do you know what? If everything goes tits up and 56K goes down the drain, it's not what I want. It's not going to be the end of the world. Whereas it felt like, with 250K, that felt a bit more scary, certainly for first investment property. So I'd done a lot of work. I knew about Krakow, about Poland, understood the buying process, had some connections there, been out visited. So I kind of got pretty comfortable with that before doing it. And for some odd reason, I was more comfortable simply because of the entry level pricing. Now, that might not be the logic for some people. And I know a lot of people have invested abroad and become a cropper. But when I hear those stories, they all have one thing in common. And it's that they haven't gone in with their eyes open, and they haven't really done their due diligence or checked things out. So for me, it felt less risky at that time for a first investment to go to Krakow, Poland. So that was my Fatoib, my first time overseas investment.
I've never heard that word before. But...
No, I've just yeah. First time we've all heard of Fatobs, first time overseas. First time buyers, FTBs. So it's a Fatoib, first time overseas investor buyer, whatever combination you want.
So you mentioned that you see a lot of people do the due diligence wrong. So how do you do your area search when going into a new area? If you maybe could show us or mention it.
So at a very high level, when unfamiliar with a country or an area, I have like a structured mnemonic that I use, which is kind of where I draw on my business experience, my management consultancy, where I did like lots of market entry studies and all the rest of it. And so people in business will be familiar with like pest or pestle analysis. So I've got like a step-led approach where I use each of those mnemonics as a checklist to make sure I understand the dynamics of an area. So, you know, the S is for social, you know, sort of the local population breakdown in that particular area. The T is for technology or infrastructure. You know, like here in the UK, we've got lots of infrastructure projects. In Poland at the time, you know, lots of EU investment was going in, building the road and rail infrastructure. And then the E is for economic financial. You're looking at the local micro economy. You know, is it a growing economy? Is it attracting inward investment? Is it attracting multinationals to be based there? And if you're looking overseas, that could also include things like Forex, foreign exchange, exposure tax, all of that. The P is for political. Are you investing in a country where inward investment is encouraged or foreign ownership is encouraged? And that also works at a local level as well. You know, the political flavour of a particular area, particularly in the UK, you know, if you've got a Tory-led council versus a Labour-led, you know, that has a sort of intrinsic influence and a correlation to the makeup of that particular locality. The L is for legal. You know, what's the legal framework, the buying, the rental framework. The environment, you know, if your strategy is holiday lets, you know, you might well be targeting areas of national beauty because you can tend to get a premium rental for holiday lets in outstanding areas, you know, different areas that distinguish themselves, like an area of national beauty would be a good spot. And D is for the demographic, you know, the population makeup. If you're into bungalow flips, you kind of want to be in an area where, you know, there's big demand for single-story housing, and that you know that you can sell it on very easily. So that, you know, the age of the local population is important. So at a very high level, you can use those kind of, you know, a step-led type framework, just so you're get familiar and comfortable with whether that's the right, either the right country or the right area for you to be investing in.
Okay, so that's a really deep due diligence that you just mentioned. So let's say if one of those doesn't stack up, do you still pull the trigger, or does it need to be does it need to tick all of the boxes?
Well, that for me is quite a high level, you know, just getting familiar with an area. You know, people who are investing on their doorstep, they will know all of that. That will be instinctively part of what they do. But that would be like the first screening point. But then it's looking at the property prices in the area, you know, getting down to the nitty gritty. And it's at that level then where there's a lot more detail for me. And I'll be doing a lot of desk research, looking at the portals, looking at the demand for rent, having lots of conversations with professionals, estate agents, letting agents, looking at numbers, looking at the kind of strategy. And it's at that level then that I would need to get a lot more comfortable. And I suppose I am of the philosophy, you know, the Pareto 80-20 rule. You know, I think that for me, I can get comfortable with 80% of it. I think that there's always going to be an element of unknown. You never know all the answers up front before you get involved. But, you know, whether I'm doing due diligence for myself or on behalf of clients, I spend at least 50% of my time doing due diligence and checking things out. And if I can get to the stage where I'm 80% comfortable with something and the 20% are the lesser important, you know, they're not so important, then, you know, that's probably robust enough for me to proceed. But there are some deal breakers. I mean, if you can't make any money, you know, the numbers don't stack, or it's going to be too difficult, or it's, oh yes, might squeeze out on a wing and a prayer, then that's probably not worth doing. You've got to be, I think, you know, pretty just pretty confident. 80% there that it's going to work, and just be prepared to work with the other 20%, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So how important is the political and the economic factors?
Well, it depends on what your strategy is. So for me, let's talk about Surrey. It's a pretty affluent area. So, you know, the area has to remain attractive and have, you know, investment, and you know, property can be quite an illiquid thing. But my strategy is quite long term. Personal investing for me is about building up a retirement pot. It's about funding family lifestyle. You know, I don't need desperately the investment income right now to live on. For me, it's about building up a steady stream of income, you know, for in a few years' time. So I want to be, you know, buying in an area that is buoyant, has got up, you know, it's going to carry on being an attractive place for people to be. And, you know, we've got an investment here in Surrey that has done incredibly well just through capital growth. You know, it's not the cheapest of places to invest. So someone might buy, I don't know, they could probably buy 10 properties up in Derby or Bradford or wherever, you know, versus, you know, one property here. And it's, you know, buying property is not something that you can do in 5 minutes. It does take time. You have deals that don't always work and fall through. So for me, I want to invest in an area that's got good prospects where I can buy and can hold rather than keep churning. And where I like the balance of yield and capital growth. So for me, the area is important because it's long term, and it's that's going to affect capital appreciation. So I suspect if it's not, you know, people aren't investing and wanting a bit of capital appreciation, all they're interested in is yields, then maybe that's not quite such a priority for them.
Yeah. And how do you calculate like the capital appreciation? Do you put like 2%, or do you go by historic, or how do you do it?
Well, I look at what the value of the property is now versus when we bought it, and then look at, you know, on a per annum basis, how much that's appreciated by, and then obviously take into account any improvements and things like that. But, you know, there's a property that I've got that, you know, we haven't really done too much with. It was a bit of shabby condition, and you know, you hear of people who've done the refurbishments, the flips, and the rest of it, and mine's a bit more of a slow motion refurb. You know, the part of the strategy was buy it, get it tenanted, and just gradually improve it over time and raise rents. And that's the strategy I've pursued and executed, and it's worked really well. So we've had the capital appreciation, which has been a natural thing in this area anyway, plus we've improved the property and managed to improve the cash flow. So and I tend to negotiate quite hard. I tend to get decent. I'm one of these people that said, when someone says, oh, you can't do that, you'll never get that price for the property. I just, you know, seem to end up buying okay. And I've got a property at the minute, and I won't talk specifics because I still haven't. We've just sort of got to get to exchange and completion before I talk a bit more about it. But again, I almost surprised myself putting in a low ball offer on a property, again, sort of quite local, and it's going to be work, and it's run down. It needs a lot of work doing to it, and it's going to cost a lot of money. It's not just a sort of, you know, put in a new bathroom or just, you know, change the kitchen and bathroom. It's a bit more than that. It's basically going to need gutting and sort of starting again. So there's a lot of uncertainty with that, as you will know, with the costs of building increasing at the minute, the time frames, trying to get decent builders, we've got lack of delivery, all of that kind of malarkey. So it's not going to be an easy thing, and the time frames I've tried to budget for are trying to be as realistic as possible in the current environment. But again, if it goes according to plan and I manage to add the value that I think I can, you know, it'll be happy days. If I can't, I mean, and it will have to significantly increase the value of the property. But I kind of work things out on a, I've done my desk research on what the square foot price is in that particular locality, and based on the square footage that I'll be increasing that property by, it should work. But you know, you never know whether a plan's going to come together until you actually come to sell, or you know. So yes, I think I kind of lost track of what the question was. Tell me if I've answered it.
You have answered it. You have answered it. So what tools do you use when searching on desktop? Like you mentioned, you do desktop research. How do you do it?
Yeah, I actually quite enjoy doing that, you know, playing around online. So I use all the classic stuff that anyone else would, the portals, and all the rest of it. And I also use property data. There are a number of tools out there like property data, Sprift, all who sort of, not all who, they all have their different take, but basically consolidate a lot of that stuff, you know, so like the individual research source, like locating for looking at schools, crime rates, land registry, portal data. They basically, you know, bring all of that in one place, and it saves a lot of time. So you can get a snapshot overview of, you know, what the capital growth is in a particular area, what the average yield is. And that gives a nice overview if you're looking at comparing, you know, Surrey versus Derby versus Bradford versus Birmingham, whatever it might be. I also, you know, do use Google Earth, Bing, just get different perspectives on different areas. I also quite I like using local authority planning portals. You know, if you're looking at adding value to a property, you can look online and see what's the likelihood of getting permission to do the kind of changes you want to make. So, you know, the property that I'm hopefully going to be signing on the dotted line on soon, you know, it's in a conservation area. So what can you and can't you get away with on a conservation area? You can get away probably with a single story, but maybe not a two-story, you know, and stuff that you can't sort of see from the road. So it depends on what your strategy is as to what sources you use. But I also, yeah, I mean, and then there are some other, you know, things that I've come across, depending on what you're looking at, like Nimbus and Land Insight. If you're looking for development opportunities, you're looking for land, you can use all of those sort of tools. And in fact, they also give things like average rental yields and price per square foot and all the rest of it. So it's horses for courses depending on what it is that you're looking at. But there's some of the things that I use.
Okay, yeah, that's good. I actually use also property data, so it's good. We actually had him on the podcast explaining everything, and so yeah, property data is it's really good, and obviously you need to use all of the other ones you mentioned as well. So how do you mitigate risk then?
Mitigating risk. I suppose this is where some of the marketing mindset comes in. It's like, you know, who is it that you're serving? What is your exit strategy? And working back from there, it's like, do you, so for example, in Poland, I wanted a long-term tenant who is basically working locally. The location of the property is near lots of businesses, big businesses, and it's quite a basic flat. So for me, it was thinking through, you know, what a professional tenant. Are we in the right place for that kind of tenant? Are we delivering the right kind of finish for that particular tenant? And what's the price point in terms of rental amount going to be for that tenant? And likewise for you know, the kinds of things that I'm doing here in the UK. So mitigating risk, I think, is starting at the end and working backwards. What is it you're trying to do and achieve? And then that will influence the location, the type of property, the kind of finish. You know, if you're doing a flip, you might not be too fussed about putting the best quality of everything in a property because, you know, if your things go according to plan, you might well have sold it on within 6 or 12 months or 18 months. Whereas if it's a long-term hold, or, you know, your HMO strategy, you might well want really good, decent quality hard-wearing fixtures and fittings in there. And if you're trying to keep your options open in terms of a number of exit strategies, you might want to go mid-range with stuff, you know, that, okay, might be a flip, and then if I end up holding it, that it's still going to work. It's not all going to fall apart in 12 months. So I would say mitigating risk is working backwards from the end, having a number of exit strategies, and contingency planning. I think that never has contingency planning been so important than today. I mean, who would have known a couple of years back that COVID would hit? Who would have known that here in the UK, we would not only have Brexit and COVID, you know, hitting the property market. So, you know, lack of lorry drivers for delivering goods across all parts of the economy. Some materials in short supply, costs of materials going up. What might normally have been a 12 week sort of turnaround on a project might well now be 24 weeks. So contingency planning for me involves having a contingency budget built into your Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is that you use, having contingency timeframes, and a range of different options, having contingency exits, you know, a number of different exits for getting out of the thing. And then also for me, starting early on, you know, there are some things that you can do, quite basic things right at the outset. And whilst a lawyer or a solicitor will check out title of a property, there's nothing to stop someone paying £3 and downloading a title deed from Land Registry. And that can help, A, verify that the vendor is who they say they are. B, you know, you can check out if there's any problems with easements, you know, if there's any constraints, or, you know, on the title, if there's any charges on there. Plus also you get a feel for the history, pricing history, which can also help with your opening negotiation. So there are some quite simple, cheap, accessible things that someone can be doing that can reduce risk, and doing them quite early on in the process, as part of the pre-screening before you've got involved with spending a load of money on legals and potentially getting an architect involved or whatever it might be that you're going to be doing. So yeah, and starting early on means that you're not so time pressured, because when we're all under, you know, the kibosh of time, we will make mistakes like that. And actually, I've also learned to trust my gut quite a bit. For me, you know, if you've got experience in life and you've got a gut instinct, that's a distillation of knowledge, expertise, experience, and if that's grumbling and giving you a strange sensation, there's usually a reason why. And sometimes that might be because you're in an uncomfortable situation, you're trying something new. We all get that, you know, butterflies in the stomach, but it's trying to learn to identify that and separate it from alarm bell, gut instinct churning in the gut, which is quite different. So if you can distinguish the two, you know, you can use that as an early warning signal to maybe check a few things out, or the thing that's giving you cause for concern. And I imagine, Nana, that must be the same for you, investing at distance.
Yeah.
I mean, what role does your gut instinct play in it?
It does a lot, because when you feel something wrong, it's actually often wrong if you don't like. You can double check it, but we walked away from a deal because it felt wrong. It was too much uncertainty, so we just walked. And now our gut instinct said that, yeah, you should not take this. And
yeah.
We checked and checked and checked and checked, and we're like, yeah, this and this, and we're like, we should just go on our gut.
Yeah, do you know? And sometimes you can actually check that out. I before I went into this particular transaction that I've got going on at the minute, I went and had a look at another property, and in fact, I'd looked at loads of properties online, and just dismissed. And I saw this one, and I thought, oh, okay, it looks estate. but I can see that it could add value. I'll just go and have a look. And I went and had a look and I thought, oh my God, this is far worse than the pictures are showing. And my gut instinct was, oh, well, partly run, but also partly, you know, it was in a really good plot. It was a corner plot. There was a lot of potential for doing stuff, but the actual building was in such a state, and the vendors, for all sorts of reasons, you know, it was a kind of a probate sale. So that the vendors had done all sorts to the property, but they just didn't look as though they had got the right permissions in place for having done that. So I thought, oh my goodness, it's not only all the work that I can see that needs doing, that there may be putting everything right that they've done. And it's funny because I had a meeting with an architect friend of mine, and I just sort of said, look, you know, I've got this and I've got this. And her gut instinct was the same as mine. I thought, yeah, I've got to trust my gut on that one. That's, yeah.
Yeah, I think you should always trust your gut.
Yeah.
So you mentioned all of this. It's so much important now to have contingency fee in your calculation. How much do you have now during the shortage, the pandemic, and all of this? How much do you price in, and how much did you price in before?
Yeah. Well, this particular project has been happening since the pandemic. So now the rule of thumb is everyone's saying if you used to put 10% in, you should be putting 20% in now. So I think I've built it in several places. I've built a bit of contingency in on the pricing for the individual elements. So I still have my 10% contingency, plus also I've kind of trebled or quadrupled the timeframes. So I'm kind of looking at the finance cost over a much longer period of time. And obviously, I really don't want it to last what I've projected in the spreadsheet, and things will look a lot better. But I've kind of built it in a number of different ways, financially, timeframe wise, how long I'll have to have the finances going for. And I'm trying to get everything in place before I actually take ownership. So I've already got, you know, drawings about what I'd like to do with the property, so that once we get, you know, to actually signing on the dotted line, I can push all the buttons to try and reduce that time frame, because it is going to require planning permission. And again, planning permission has been taking an awful lot longer to get, because all the local authorities are short-staffed and, you know, don't have time and all the rest of it. But again, this is where the planning portal comes in. I've looked on the planning portal, and there are a couple of similar things going on in the similar sort of area. And I might be surprised, but the timeframes have actually been quite reasonable. So in a different area, I think that there are problems, but in this particular borough, you know, it may well, you know, they might still stick to the same timeframes. And these have all been going on during COVID. So I've checked quite a few things out in terms of contingency planning and checking out. And I'm also putting in dual planning permission. So I'm putting in for permitted development rights and for planning, and see what happens. Because if full planning comes in, yay, happy days. You know, we can just go ahead and do the stuff. So you know, I've got to plan the works and schedule the works in such a way that we do all the bits that we can do under permitted development, and hold off on the bits that are reliant on the full planning, and then just make a judgment call as to whether we're being, you know, sent around the houses. There's another property saying, but you know, whether we're being mucked around with timeframes. Because, you know, a lot of councils will say, you know, on the deadline that they're meant to be giving a decision, they'll say, oh, that bit of paperwork's missing, or, you know, and then make a judgment call as to whether or not it's even worth playing that game. So yeah, so I suppose contingency planning, and I've done it in a number of different ways.
Yeah. So how many X's do you have when you're going into a project or deciding?
How many what, sorry?
Exits, like strategies or...
Yeah. I think that, you know, theoretically it goes, have several, you know, 3 or so. I've got 2. I've got a couple. Some people might need more, you know. So for me, it's either on this particular project, for example, it's either sell, or if I can't crystallize what I've got in my Excel spreadsheet, then I'll hold, rent and hold, and then maybe crystallize that and more in a couple of years' time. So this for me is where it helps being in an area where there's capital appreciation, because it helps be a bit more forgiving. So if, you know, things really don't go according to plan, and the profit margin is not one that I can stomach, I also know that the rental market, and particularly for what I'm looking at doing, is particularly strong. So yeah, both of those would work for me. So I've got a couple, you know, some people might need more than that, or maybe the third exit option is an adaptation or a combination of the first two, you know.
Yeah, I'm with you. So what is the difference with remote due diligence versus traditional? If you maybe could walk me through it.
Yeah, well, none of this will be unfamiliar to you, because this is what you do, isn't it? For me, I think it's distance due diligence is due diligence on steroids. You know, it's just being that much more thorough. It's using Google Earth, you know, Google Maps, and all of those other sources, Bing, coming in from different angles. Really, if you're not someone that does a lot of due diligence up front, I think you have to. I think you can come across, whether you're actually even in the same country. I mean, if you're a lot of southern-based investors who are investing up north, you know, they can still come across, or even if they're in the same country. Okay, they're familiar with the buying process, yeah. But it still involves checking things out. Plus, also, actually, I think the other really important aspect is you're so much more reliant on good people. You know, we talked about gut earlier on. You've got to have a gut instinct about someone, and if you find that someone is saying something but doing something else, or, you know, you feel that they're hoodwinking you, I think that isn't a good place to start. You know, sometimes you can be overly skeptical, and sometimes that can kill everything off. You know, so sometimes there are genuine mistakes, or, you know, misunderstandings. So it's a question of just trying to resolve which it is. But yeah, I think that really checking out people and making sure you're comfortable with them. I mean, one of the things we're all on is social media. But I think, again, it's worth being skeptical with social media, because just because someone is in someone else's LinkedIn connection list doesn't mean to say they know who they are or like them or trust them. It just means some people on LinkedIn accept every invitation they get. Yeah. Others don't. You know, so if there is someone who, you know, you want to check out, it is worthwhile reaching out to that person. Say, look, you know, see that someone's in your group. Do you actually know them? And just sort of check, because I had, I can't remember how it happened, but there was someone in Portugal who looked, you know, they were quite interesting potentially for me to work with. And they were in lots and lots of, lots and lots of property connections with lots of influential and high profile people. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then just had a couple of conversations with those people, and they didn't know who he was, because I was forming an opinion about this person. And then it just sort of showed to me, well, actually, the impression that I was getting was that he'd hooked up with all of those people because they were influential, high profile, and it actually had this positive halo effect for him. And then when I started asking some quite detailed questions, he got really quite uppity. And, you know, that says something. That says something that either I'm being too direct and rude and culturally that's not acceptable, or he hasn't got answers for those questions, and actually it's a very good way of getting out of answering them by expressing outrage and indignation. So coming back to the distance due diligence, it's due diligence on steroids, plus also really checking out the people. And with social media, it's a really great tool, but it's also can lull you into a false sense of security.
Yeah.
And another thing for me also is using Companies House. I don't know, Nana, have you used Companies House before?
We use it a lot.
Yeah. So you know, it's you know, and it's quite tricky because you kind of have to get an understanding of how to use it, because so for example, developers will create special purpose vehicles and then they'll dissolve them for each development. So you know, it takes an understanding of how that whole process works. But sometimes gaps or errors on Companies House can tell a particular story. That I was approached to work with, this is a different example, approached to work with one company, and I just sort of checked out the people at the top of that company, and I thought I recognized the name of someone, and checking on a LinkedIn profile, there was a big gap in that person's work, career, history, past, and doing a bit more digging around, it turns out they were the person who I thought they were, that did work at that company during that period that's a gap on their LinkedIn profile. And I suspect there was a reason why that wasn't on their LinkedIn profile, because it didn't go particularly well. And so, I do think you just have to be skeptical, but not too skeptical, because you'll kill everything in its tracks by being too skeptical. But and the other really useful tool and technique, I think, for distance investors is you're going to be reliant perhaps on a letting agent. You're going to be reliant potentially on a source or a buying agent, someone like me. You've got to be comfortable with them, that they do what they say they're going to do. But also then if you're holding it and renting out, you want to make sure that you've got a decent letting agent. You've done all this due diligence, checked out the property, making sure you're investing in the right thing. You now want it to work for you once you've got a tenant in, whatever your strategy might be. And so asking or interviewing letting agents, saying, what would you do if there was a water leak? Or, what would you do if, asking those sort of exploratory questions can be sometimes a lot more revealing than saying, oh, we charge 10%, management fee, or whatever that is. That's very easy just to sort of send through. It's only when the going gets tough and, you need them to problem solve for you, that, the proof is in the pudding as to whether or not they're going to manage it in a decent way for you.
Yeah. That really good answer, and I think the listener will like mind blowing, like, whoa. So where do you? No, you go.
No. Go on. You carry on. I'll have a sip of water.
So where do you find people to view for you? Let's say if you are abroad, like the one you did with in the Warsaw.
In Krakow. In
Krakow, sorry.
Because I also help people buy in Continental Europe. When I first set up my business, that's what I was doing. I mean, I went out and did the viewing for that, but I can also do the view, but I've got long-standing relationships with some of these. I've got quite a wide network in countries like Poland, Spain, France, and latterly more building up a network in Portugal. I work with local agents who I know and trust. So having been and seen that myself, I've met with lots of local contacts, like estate agent, local lawyer, all of that kind of stuff. So I did that for myself, but I can organise that if someone else is buying there, and likewise if someone's investing in the UK, I can do that. But I mean, there are other services in the UK. I mean, you may well have used them, the likes of Vuber and the sort of the remote viewing. So from a transactional point of view, you just want 6 houses looked at. You want to just sort of pictures and videos. You can use a service like that. But if you want someone who's going to help ascertain, is that does that meet your strategy more? Is that the right kind of investment for you, given what you've said your objectives are and what you want? Is that going to be good for it? If you want more of a sort of judgment call, it would be using someone like me to deliver that kind of service. So it's horses for courses, you know, depending on what someone wants. But I try wherever possible to be going and doing personal viewings, and certainly I know my clients appreciate that. So if I've got to go off and do the viewings, or my clients want me to go and do those physical viewings, I will just organize really well. I tend to pack in, 2 days worth of viewings. You always get, viewings that are going to drop out, new ones that are going to, between setting it up and going along. And I just try and make effective use of time. And likewise, if I'm going abroad, I will, and I suspect you must do the same, Anna, but I would pack it in, and I would supplement it with meeting, professionals and whoever else I need to meet as well, alongside that. So I think you have to be better organized when you're investing at distance, because you have to make much better use of your time.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. I agree. So how does buying differ from one country to the next? Let's say when you bought in Poland, comparing with UK.
Yeah, no, it's very different. Actually, you're in Sweden, you must have a continental buying process. You must have a notarized buying process in Sweden. Do you?
No, we use solicitor. We use estate agent only. So we don't have any solicitor. Everything is very quick comparing to the UK.
Yes. Okay. So so probably one of the most highly regulated markets would be France, where an estate agent, you have to be regulated. You have to pass exams, and you work in a regulated environment. So it's a bit like what you're talking about in Sweden. The estate agents will do a lot of that conveyancing part of the transaction, so that you don't necessarily need to be using a solicitor, but then the transaction is signed, sealed and delivered at a notary's office. Do you use notaries in Sweden?
Not what I'm aware of.
Okay. So in countries like, so you would have a notarized process, and that's pretty similar across a lot of continental European countries. So Spain's not as highly regulated as France, but there are elements of it there. And again, it's a notarized buying process. Same in Poland, and so it's very different from buying in England and Wales, which is, the solicitor does the conveyancing, the estate agent basically finds the buyer and just gets the agreement sorted, and then all the legal stuff is done via a lawyer. And that can be quite confusing for Brits buying abroad, because they might not be familiar with a notary, and a notary is like a special. It's someone with legal powers, but with special governmental powers as well. So they basically are responsible for collecting the taxes for the government and making sure that the title is as it should be, and that the identity of the people buying and selling are as it should be. But there's a lot that can happen before that. So, if you are trying to negotiate the terms of the contract or the price, or, and making sure that everything is right before you actually get to that point when, you get the notary authorizing the transaction and signing of deeds. So sometimes that can be a bit confusing, because some overseas estate agents will say to a British buyer, "Oh, you don't need a lawyer because you've got a notary," but actually it's very good practice, and there's much better level of protection to still have a lawyer involved, because they're representing the buyer's interests, whereas the notary is like just checking out the facts, not necessarily protecting in the same way that a lawyer would. So the buying process is different in continental Europe versus England and Wales. And in Scotland, it's different. In England and Wales, it can be gazumped. Someone can come in with a higher offer, and you think you've got a deal, and it doesn't work, and that can cause an awful lot of confusion and frustration. Whereas it's different in Scotland, that that's illegal to be doing that. That's not the way that they're set up. So lots of different buying processes, even within the UK.
Yeah, that's true. But that's interesting. So I have enjoyed this very much, and I hope the listeners and the viewers have as well. But we have 4 questions that I always ask my guests. So if you had unlimited funds, who would you have as a mentor?
Ooh, now I've never been big on paying for mentors or big training programs and all the rest of it. I'm far more of a targeted person. If I identify something, I'll go on. But I've had support throughout my property journey from lots of really good friends who are also really good in business. So I've got a friend, Carol Gaskell. She's really, really good in the whole sort of coaching, and I find her very inspirational, and we sort of sound. And I've got another friend, Palm here, who's really good on the PR. So I've had help and support from friends along the way, but I suppose it's someone who I've just been working with recently is a lady called Trish McGurr, who's she's very knowledgeable in business and very knowledgeable in property, but also is a champion of women in business fulfilling their potential. And just doing some of the work with her there are some small things that have created big impacts on what I've been doing recently. So if I had unlimited funds, she works more on a consulting basis. So rather than a mentor, I'd probably spend a bit of money on someone like Trish.
Okay, so Trish, we should chase her.
Yeah.
And what about books then? One book you would recommend to your children? It doesn't have to be property.
Yeah, okay. Now this is a really old book because it was one of the first books I ever read when I went into business that had a real big impact on my life, which was, and I don't know whether you will have heard of it, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, Susan Jeffers.
No, but if you say it's good, I will read it.
Well, so we were talking about the gut instinct, and you get this odd feeling in your stomach.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be fear. It's the uncomfortable. And so it's about understanding when it is fear of failure or discomfort, or when it is like alarm bells. And so for me, it is there's an awful lot I've done in life that I wouldn't have done if I'd have just let that icky feeling in my stomach stop me. So I tend to feel the fear and do it anyway. So I think that's a really important book.
And when it comes to for every investor, and that doesn't need to be property as well.
I don't know, there's a book out there. It's something to do with maybe there's a book that's called Look Before You Leap, and it's all about due diligence. I don't know. I do just think investors should just be a bit more skeptical, just be aware of it. I'm doing a lot of presentations on distance due diligence at the minute, and it's just amazing how many people in property don't do some of that stuff. So I don't know that there's a book actually, but it's just to do something around educating around.
But then you Louise, you need to release that book.
Oh, maybe. Yes,
if there's no book, you need to release it.
Yeah, maybe okay. I'll need to do something. Yeah.
Okay, one property book then.
It's the classic, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki. I actually found it a very irritating read because it was very American in its style. Yeah. But for me, it's just fundamental at the start of property, or if someone has got family or friends around them that keep saying, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. It actually helps. And if you've been brought up to say you should always save, you should never get into debt, I think that is a seminal book just to understand the principles of what you're trying to do, irrespective of anything else. And when I decided that property was what I wanted to do, I made my husband read it. And it wasn't quite read that and you either agree or it's divorce. But, read this because this is the route I want to take, and it would be most useful if you understood and you were with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's played quite an important role in my property journey.
Yeah, I gave that book to my mom as well, because he was like, oh, this, when we started, oh, this property, you should just focus on your job and all of this. And then I'm like, please, Mom, just read this book and then come back and we can have the discussion.
Did she read it and come back? And had she changed her view as a result?
Yeah, she was like, understand. Oh, why didn't I have this when I was young? So yeah, so now she get it. and I will give it to my kids as well, because I know that he got like have one for teenagers or something, like a more child friendly version. But then at the same time, maybe that will make them like, no, I don't want to go to university.
Well, you know what, and the other thing that was, and again, there's possibly a book out there as well. For children, I think one of the most important things, because my kids are growing up now, one of the things I really, really want for them is to learn the difference between assertiveness and aggression. And I went on a course. It wasn't a book, it was a course. It was a one-day course, and it was one of the most valuable one-day courses that I'd gone on. I'd never realized the difference between being assertive and being aggressive, and the importance that plays in persuading someone else to do something, and in influencing and in negotiation is critical. But also to be able to recognize the difference in someone else, to know that you can, you don't have to accept aggression. Assertiveness is different. It's very, very different. And for young people growing up, and I see my children in certain situations, I think that that's just such an important thing for them to. So there must be a book out there about assertiveness versus aggression somewhere as well.
Otherwise, you know what to do.
Another one, yeah.
You have 2 books
to write.
But Louise, this has been a pleasure, and I hope the listeners and viewers have enjoyed it such as me. I've enjoyed it. You have given me some golden nuggets, things that I didn't think about that I should maybe do in my due diligence. So I hope they have taken that away as well. How can people reach out to you or get in contact with you if they want to?
Thanks, Anna. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you as well, and your questions have been probing and made me really think. So that's been great. I'm on social media, oddly enough. I'm on all the major channels. I've got a LinkedIn profile under my name, Louise Reynolds, and Property Venture, but I use the personal profile. Facebook, louise.a.reynolds, Instagram, similar handle, and also YouTube. So if someone wants to get to know me a bit more, I've got, it's not a major thing for me, but there are some videos on there. So yeah, please, connect with me and send me a message and let me know that you listened to
podcast.
Yeah, listen to your podcast.
It's difficult to say Pengaflöd podcast.
Yeah, well, or Miracle Properties. Very easy to say. Listen, yeah.
Okay, people, don't be stressed. Invest. Bye.